We've got some experts here on stage that really drive and lead the market in understanding how to identify what people want and how to deliver that. And so without further ado, why don't we kind of go down the line and you guys give a little background and start at the end here and share your history a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, and hello everybody. It is such a small crowd. I want to encourage everyone to pull in and have a conversation with us as we're up here. We can kind of informally share and make sure that we're hitting what you all are most interested in as we're discussing the customer journey and what this means to us. I'm Beth Rogozinski. I'm a serial entrepreneur and I have a background in hardware, software, and services. My first startup was through university when I started the Multimedia Studies Program at San Francisco State University in the 90s, and I ended up teaching there. And a lot of what we did when we were designing multimedia was to think about user flows and user journeys and how these journeys come and move people through. Post that time, I was at a big hardware company called Silicon Graphics, if anybody remembers SGI. I helped to build the entertainment team there, and then later the visual workstations division, which for a short period of time rose our stock by about 30%. I then joined a company called Macromedia, where we worked on a product called Final Cut and sold that to Apple. And then during the .com, helped to start a .com, which we took public, which was quite the journey in itself. Since that time, I've started games and apps companies that I've been CEO of, co-founder with my founder here of Transmedia SF, which is a marketing and agency that looked at a full story world around multiple different ways to go to market, but to make sure that you're touching and tapping into all of the touch points that your customers, all of your customers and stakeholders are interested in. Most recently, starting in 2013, I turned my attention to digital medicine, and I've been doing a lot of work recently in healthcare, both on the services and software side, but also working with hardware companies that have big hardware systems like ultrasound, as well as smaller medical device and wellness devices. As Greg mentioned, I am also co-founder in hardware company.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah. Hi, my name is Zuckerman. My background is actually narrative, so visual effects, gaming, animation, film was where I started. And then a few years back, got out of that, founded Transmedia SF with Beth, and consulted on a lot of different startups and companies in media and media tech mostly, but also in clean tech. I also actually produced the Clean Tech Open. I actually produced the first two hardware cons with Beth and Greg, and an awesome team of hardware fanatics. I've worked mostly in software, but I do have understanding of hardware, especially through working with these ecosystems. And lately, I've been really looking at narrative in the arms of, or in the hands of social movements, in the hands of environmental movements, in the hands of entrepreneurs and startups, and building around that. For my day job right now, I'm VP of Product and Operations for a social venture. We just launched our platform a few months ago. It's called Life Guides. And there we have a dual marketplace, so it actually gives us a very unique understanding of complexity and how do we actually align a system where we have two different groups. One is kind of, if you think about an Uber driver versus the rider, how do we actually find them, train the one side, find the other side, have a good journey, and then how do we actually get them to be together? I always say we have a dual marketplace, so we do everything 3 times. So it creates a very, very interesting complexity. The other few things I do is also I'm the co-chair of the outreach committee for the IEEE Ethical Aligned Design. So this is, IEEE has this program that looks at ethics in AI and AS, autonomous systems, and really how do we actually code and bring that back into actual standards. So we don't have issues like a car driving and not actually understanding that they see a human or a dog or a cat and runs them over. I mean, those are things that are becoming the next few years and definitely in the next decades is going to be very, very vital for actual survival. So very excited to be part of that as well. And just for the fun hardware part, I'm also a beta tester for a new fitness trainer that just launched, and I can talk about a little bit about that just because I've been with them for 8 months, just enjoying it and being kind of from the user perspective, an end user, and they've got a very interesting system of combining both content and actually hardware and technology. So I can bring that into, because my very good friend is one of their senior designers. I was actually very much in that realm for a long time to kind of see how they're going. And the last thing about hardware, a lot of people know the Fitbit. I had the kind of amazing happenstance that James Park was my neighbor, so I saw Fitbit when it was a sketch and an idea. So that's how I kind of been very much adjacent to the hardware world for a very, very long time. So thank you very much. Excited to be here.
So hi everybody, I'm Frederick. I might have a slight accent, as some of you picked up. I actually grew up in Germany, lived in France and worked there for about 7 years in Paris. I am an expert in human behavior, but not just generally the human behavior throughout all its psychological issues, actually a little bit more fundamental. I'm an expert in innate or instinctive human behavior. That's research I have been doing back in Europe from a biological point of view, in behavioral ecology is the field's name, and I've actually been able to transport that over into application in marketing. So I've been in Paris, I've done a PhD there for over several years while working in business schools, notably business schools specialized in entrepreneurship, on figuring out how instinctive behavior influences consumer behavior to the point where we can nicely, as marketers, manipulate consumers to do whatever without them noticing, and with them being very convinced that there was no influence in the behavior. It was just totally normal.
We don't call it that. Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of the thing. If I'm in academia right now at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, I have to tell people that no, I was in the consumer behavior part, which is like this subgroup of marketing where we analyze how marketers influence consumers, and then with our research, policymakers can decide whether or not they want to interfere. That is an interesting background in the sense of it has allowed me, while working and lecturing in business schools particularly, given my international background and being very early on tasked to do program design for international programs, particularly how do we launch businesses internationally, to kind of bring every piece of it together is how can I understand consumer behavior wherever they are, and how can I actually figure out how to talk to the people, how to bring value to them, and instead of kind of shoving down the throat of any consumer wherever we think they should consume our product, it led to developing a method where we can do the opposite based on the product you have, which is valid in itself. You have developed it as an engineer. It brings value. Figure out where in the world are the people that will derive most value from that product right now, so that you can actually start bringing it to market there. The same thing then obviously with international sourcing and so on. So I basically, in the last business school I was in France, it's a small one, it's specialized in entrepreneurship to the point where every 1 out of 5 students graduates into their own company, and that's all over programs. So basically around 30 to 50 companies created with every cohort every time they graduate, and I was the consultant part in go-to-market strategy, figure out that first market where you want to go, and figure out how you can design this customer journey from the customer perspective, even if you don't know them, to get the people to optimally use your product, or maybe tweak it so that it works for them. Now I'm at UC Berkeley and I'm doing kind of the same thing. I am designing programs for Berkeley, for students that are interested in developing, for example, their own companies. We're just actually talking with Hardware Massive of developing a founders program. The idea is to not only do what most programs do, is basically you need to have it in order to succeed afterwards. We're creating programs that teach people the skills that they need as hardware or startup founders, just different to learning about entrepreneurship. You can go to any university will teach you what is entrepreneurship, what is the concept of that. That's nice and good. When you leave the classroom, you have no idea how to start applying it. And then you have, on the other end, accelerators and incubators that just mentor you 18 hours every over the course of 4 months or something, and then you're on your own. So basically, whether or not you succeed is, did you have it before or not? Nobody's really helping you. We are designing the middle piece programs where you literally learn these fundamental skills of a founder. And that's pretty much it.
Quick feedback on that. Who would be interested in a 1-year program for hardware? Full-blown, learn it all, get access to all the tools, get access to all the network. I mean, it's, you gotta quit your day job for a year, but then you get it back because you start your own company.
Actually, not necessarily. The program, as it would be structured, there would be some classes in the evening. We can have a few classes during the day. What is interesting about this concept is literally today you start your business. Have you ever really learned how to negotiate? And this is something that we can ask ourselves. Maybe you had some mentoring, maybe you had some help with this, but was there somebody really teaching you the very clear structure of negotiation that every salesperson in the world has learned? And every salesperson in the world will just go through that process. Like, they are mentally prepared to step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, goes up to 12. That's the sales process, period. If you don't fit into that process, if you don't know that process, how do you want to sell? Because they're just going to go through that. So that's kind of one skill, for example, that is interesting. One point that is also very interesting in terms of how do you learn entrepreneurship, by the way, it's not because you learn something, a skill like negotiation or anything, pitching or whatever, that you will make it as an entrepreneur. If you want to work in the health space, for example, if you want to work in a specific industry, you need to know about that industry. You should maybe take courses on biotech to actually also be in the labs and see how that runs every day, talk to the people, be in touch with the people that are in biotech labs, so that you get like not only the street cred, but literally the knowledge that you have that is industry specific.
Yeah, well, let's get to the main show here. So, customer journey. How comfortable do you guys feel about understanding the customer journey? Because this was kind of a new-ish concept for me, I gotta say, even though I've vaguely been dealing with it for a long time. But this really came up with Frederick and I's conversation, and this difference, especially between the customer journey and the user journey. And I thought there were some really interesting points on how to do this well that came up in our talk.
So maybe to kick off the discussion, I think for hardware people, so for us, the customer journey, as well actually as the user journey, mostly the customer journey is where it hurts most, because we design something and we're in love with it. We designed it the way we would have loved this product to be, and we put in features that we consider most important, and we leave other features off that we don't care about. Because we
I've never met a hardware engineer like that.
Exactly.
You don't want the trash can that figures out which trash you should be throwing away?
Yeah. So the thing is, that is exactly where the customer journey starts, or the concept hits. And so it hits usually where it hurts. It takes the perspective of a customer, and it literally just allows you in a very simple method to put, ideally the way I do it usually in seminars, is we take Post-its and we put every contact point that we have as a company with the customer. Or let's say the other way around, actually. We take the shoes, or we walk a mile in the shoes of the customer and put every touch point, every contact point the customer has with us. That means we don't only put the things that we can control. I can control my website, I can control the emails, the newsletter, all the things, my store, and so on. I can control all that, but I also put all the things that I cannot control. For example, the retailer has a certain, is kind of a contact point. I cannot control the store environments, but I have to be conscious about the fact that the store environment is a contact point in which the customer takes my product in their hands and tries it out. The person in the aisle at Walmart that might give them information about the product or not is a contact point. Also, word of mouth, any Yelp review, whatever, all these points are out of your control, and yet they strongly influence the consumer behavior. So customer journey, simply said, is a method that allows you to figure out when and where does your customer interact with your brand, and from there you can optimize that interaction. So usually what happens today is you outsource this to some UX design company or user experience agency. And the reality is that many of them are specialized in exactly that, UX. They will take all these different touch points and they will look at each touch point. For example, I get the product and I open it and I have it in my hands for the first time. That is a touch point, and they may design that to be optimal. So they will design around it, the packaging and everything. But they might omit the fact that you're actually taking it in your hand, and what is most valuable and the most intense experience is just holding the thing. And so they don't realize necessarily that this is the thing, this feeling that actually gives you comfort and trust in the product and makes you transition to the next touch point, which is using it. I have a very good example, which is these microphones. Usually on a panel, people are a little bit nervous. It's the same thing with the clicker whenever you have to give a presentation. If the microphone producer were as smart as Logitech, they would coat microphones with the same material, soft material that they have on their clickers, which made their clickers more successful than any other brand. Because in a stressful situation, having the comfort of a nice touch is actually something that makes me want to reuse the thing. So by giving the object a certain touch, it creates an experience that in this case is comforting, whether or not it's like particularly good or whatever, it's just comforting, and it leads me to transition to the next usage of it. I want to use that thing again.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said, and I'm going to go back actually to something that Greg said earlier about marketing often coming after the fact. And for us, the customer journey and this concept around marketing actually has to be embedded in the entire process of developing a product, and you know, kind of mirroring what Frederick is saying as well. So we actually look at, you know, doing a deep and psychographic analysis of who our customers are, what they want, you know, what they want psychologically, emotionally, and physically from the hardware product that we're looking to put out to them, right? So let's be honest, nobody really wants a vacuum. They want a clean floor, right? And so we begin with this concept of what is it that we're really selling to people, you know, and we can look to some of the models that have been out there and the most successful ones, right, where, you know, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola don't say, fizzy sugar water that'll give you diabetes, right? That's not how they push it. It's not based on the features. It's based on the pause that refreshes and, you know, the happiness factory and the things that are actually emotionally driving for our customers. And this really begins in the earliest stages of planning a company. And, to something that Frederick was saying about, that we hire UI, UX people, we really, you'd be much better off actually even hiring some of the people who you think are going to be using it and getting to know them. And we do a lot of research with small groups and large groups and utilizing a lot of the social networks to try and get this customer feedback early, often, and frequently.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, this is the Simon Sinek start with why conversation. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, especially with younger millennial groups and younger than millennials, the Gen Z. They really want to have a purpose, a story around this. Why am I doing this? What is the experience I'm going to be getting? Specifically with the company I'm working with right now, we're actually looking at an older generation, and we're also looking at an audience that this is a new novel. If you have a new novel idea, why would they need it? Like really getting into how do I even get into the brain and the mind and the setting and the experience of the person I'm trying to sell to, and also am I, depending on the product, am I a hard sell or am I an invitation to actually start bringing them into my world? And that's the marketing, that's the brand trust. Again, it's very, very dependent on what you're selling and what your product is, but creating that narrative around it, the brand trust, the brand positioning, and that comes into marketing content and all of that. Before they even come in, one of our product that we use is a attribution product, and when they showed us a demo, they were working with the guy who sells lobsters. That was really interesting. Again, it's not hardware and it's not software, it's an actual thing, right? It's a live thing. And they looked at how long did it take for people to actually, from the first time they saw and interacted with their brand to the moment they bought it the first time. It was something like 142 days. So also this whole idea of like, we're gonna just sell it, people are gonna come and that's it, and if it doesn't work, we're gonna change it. We're gonna change our funnel, we're gonna change our brand, we're gonna change everything tomorrow. If we don't actually start looking at the data from every moment, these are like all the pixels and all the things at every point until they actually get to buy the product, we actually know half the story. And then, then we can go into all kinds of awesome prototyping experiments you can do with the product itself, with the packaging. I just got to hang with Tom Chi, who's like the rapid prototyping guru, the other night, and he, in a lecture that I went to once, he talked about sitting in a mall with the packaging image and almost like an office back in headquarters with a designer, and redesigning just the look of the packaging and reprinting it and asking people, what do you like about this, what do you hate about this, and really getting very, very quick feedback on, instead of like putting so many hours to go, this is the way we love it, actually going out there and then asking your potential customers and then coming back with their feedback and changing it really, really quickly. So again, it's the, yes, but I, the creator, love this, but it could be that the product is still amazing, but it doesn't exactly fit with what your audience is looking for. So really finding that bridge, and that's also where you do a lot of experimentation and a lot of study of your audience.
Good. Let me think.
Just really quick, one other thing. So, we're talking now about the customer journey beginning in the most nascent stages of your product planning, to think about it. And clearly as entrepreneurs, we have to wake up every day and decide what not to do, right? So we've got to focus our energies on what we can do and what we can get done with the slim budgets that we often have. So, there are clever ways to do this, right? We've all got friends and families. We can all survey our social networks and make this happen. So, it really does need to begin at the nascent stages. It doesn't have to be, thousands of dollars and thousands of people surveys that large companies can afford. But I think that the other thing is that, when we've heard about packaging and unwrapping and the lifetime value of the customer, I think importantly and increasingly importantly for hardware entrepreneurs is this idea that we build a relationship with the customer. We're seeing more and more business models of hardware as a service, Trojan horse kind of models where we'll, practically give away the hardware at cost, but sell a service that goes along with it. And so I think all the more important as as we're shifting our business models around this, to rethink this, this customer relationship that we're looking to build and constantly build on, right? It's like a friendship. You can see people, but then you've got to keep up and maintain that relationship.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, a real key point we find in hardware is this break-even point, right? Because you dip so low in the beginning, you really have, you've got your tooling, you've got all your NRE costs, right? All your engineering costs. You've got all the prototyping, you've got the development, you've got the tooling, you've got the first order, and your cash is just, getting pummeled, right? And then you ship some, and then you have to place a second order. So even before you're getting money from the first order, you're putting your deposit down for the next order. And so when I look at this model, really a big, that point of getting that first product to market and starting to make those sales, and ideally the break-even point, that's really where I build models around, is with a very distinct focus on that. But a real key part of this customer journey, I think, is that it's hard to, especially with a small team, do all of this really well, right? Once you get your product in the market, at least on a manufacturing scale, right? 500, 1,000, at least as a first round, your customers then give you the feedback, right? They will let you know, and especially if you're good at it and you're asking and you're really being diligent and getting in front of them. But at that point, if you're really good at that, as a small team, they'll tell you what they want, right? You then just follow their lead, and your marketing job turns into a listening job, and you can. So getting to that point and then listening is a big step up in businesses.
I just want to caution one thing about listening, because I agree with you completely, and I agree with what Maya said. But I do think that sometimes we as designers and engineers can build a need and then fill it with what we're providing for people. And I think that this is where coming in as a storyteller is really important. And I think that we need to listen in context of what we're trying to, with the problems that we're trying to solve for people. And just one example from the world of marketing is New Coke, right? And they went out and they did these surveys where people were given like little shot glasses of Coke versus Pepsi versus RC, and they liked the sweeter versions of this better than the Coca-Cola, but they didn't have it in the whole can volume. So when it was one shot, people actually liked it in that context, but they'd taken the experience of Coca-Cola out of the context of how people were drinking it. And so I think everybody knows the abject failure that was New Coke, right? So I think that we need to do this through the filter of business strategy and having some sense of what we're trying to communicate with our product and building a story around it.
There is the white noise, I think, which you got to filter that out for sure.
Yeah, the signal to noise, yeah.
This is actually the nice thing, if you want, and if you dig after this maybe a little bit deeper into the customer journey concept, it is really that it is a method. You can go through it. You can yourself picture or put out there what you think the people are going through, and you'll find a lot of blank space or parts that you do not control, and then you can work with a small set of consumers. I've had actually, I think, the best experiences working with young startups, and then also we're doing hardware, is when even before they did the big production, with their first prototypes, they were walking through basically that journey with a few select people that would be potential consumers of this. And they point out a lot of stuff before you have even the first investment of having your first, 100,000 pieces there.
And I agree completely, and I love the concept, and we do this as well, where we map out the entire journey. We actually even come up with a really refined and defined psychographic. And I'm going to give an example from a group that everybody knows. So when Phil Knight was starting Nike shoes, Nike, he was looking for shoes that would work for distance runners. Not basketball players, not cross trainers. He was looking for one specific demographic. They needed to be lightweight because these people were going long distances. They needed to have a tread that would wear, right? And then these people actually have a unique psychographic. They're different. They have a different mindset than sprinters, right? They have a different workout ethic than tennis players. And so when you're thinking about your customer, you want to think about the customer that you want to lead with, right? the early adopter, but also who is the influencer. And so when we see brands that have been incredibly successful, they start with an incredible focus on a psychographic, and then they take that through its journey. And then, you know, what you do in your marketing is, as you turn these customers into advocates for your brand, they become ambassadors. They become part of your marketing engine.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I saw it both with Fitbit being there in the early years of just being somebody who got the first Fitbits and tried it, and actually one of the things is, again, they didn't lead with that, but I created my own narrative around my relationship with this product, which is still, you know, going strong for the, I think they're almost 10 years now. And that is the thing, you got to create that relationship, the rabid fans, the raving fans, and then support them to be your brand ambassadors. Give them extra, whatever it is, whatever your product is, extra product in the new things, you know, newsletters that actually update them that something cool is coming up, really inviting them in, because they're going to go out there and actually tell everybody what, you know, what they're doing, and of course there's the whole like unbelievable now industry of unpacking products. I mean, it's just, I mean, I just saw the 6-year-old that's earning $11 million a year unpacking toys. It's crazy. I mean, so actually getting into that influencer market, finding the person that's correct for your product that, you know, will actually want to do that. And also, of course, the thing about influencers is there's a lot of interesting data around how really do they actually help with the product. So really finding the right one and not just going with one and that's it. Not actually putting all your eggs in the basket, because that's the other thing. Like, how do you find the right one for your product, but also find different ones that might actually be smaller, but be such raving fans that will actually put your name out there to more of your audience. And also, if they're raving fans from within your audience, your first early adopter.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we'll get questions here. Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up and actually we'll open everything up to the floor. But so you have about leave some good time. But you know, Frederick, to your point, I think in the hardware, what would you see as far as customer and user journey? What are some of the key points in the customer journey that? What are those touch points that people might not be thinking about? Right, there's the store environment, there's how it's displayed, there's the packaging, there's the commercials, there's a website.
Yeah, I think in hardware, obviously, it depends on what type of hardware it is. I want to give an example which speaks basically to everyone. It's not because I have a German background, but let's talk about cars. It's very good to illustrate touch points that you might not be thinking of. If you think of BMW usually, once you drive it, you're sold on it. How do you get somebody to drive a BMW actually at a dealership? It's interestingly enough, most people that come into a dealership are kind of sold on the idea, but then they don't know exactly. They might go out without test driving, and so on. And what you would do in the customer design is you would try to make every touch point, every contact point as nice as possible. Like the opening of the door, when you go into the store, the greeting, whatever, you shower them with information, everything they want. And the result of this is that actually people do not go test drive, really. And then you lose a lot of people that like think about price when they come home, and then afterwards they don't buy the thing. So what the company realized when they were doing this is that there are ways to make people transition into that contact point you want them in, which is in the car test driving the thing, which is actually not a very nice experience. It's actually making them a little bit afraid, making them think about the cost, making them in the discussion talk about, oh yeah, well there are things you might not know that you haven't realized. You should feel it for yourself, you should be considerate of your money and so on. So basically kind of making them a little bit aware and afraid of everything that might be if they ever buy it. And then do you actually maybe want to make sure and test drive it? Sure. And then once you're in it, you kind of sold on it, if that's what you want. So the question what is the touch points that you're not aware of in hardware? It depends a little bit on the product, but the process to figure them out is actually not only to map them out, but to think about each one, how can you make it so that you transition to the next one. And what I've seen is that a lot of people, especially startups, we cut short on certain aspects that we think are not necessary because the product is still functional, and it turns out that oftentimes that specific aspect is exactly what people value most. As I just said, for example, the clickers that were the most successful clickers and presentations are the one from Logitech, simply because they have this coding, or this was a big factor. How they figured it out is because they literally looked into what happens. Why do people not feel comfortable in reusing another one and so comfortable in reusing maybe this? Maybe an interesting aspect to this is as well, you don't need to, again, shove down your product the throat of people that don't want it. There are people out there that are very interested in your product. I really, for example, love these loudspeakers, but in the Western environment, there's a thing, we're all sitting on our money. Rich people are what you call wealth hoarding right now. So there's not much disposable income for beautiful objects. There are about, I think, 19 countries right now that are considered transitioning from a full industrialization, efficiency-driven economy into an innovation-driven economy. The list is on the Global Competitiveness Report that is done by World Forum every year. You can look at these 19 countries. All of them come out of a stage of full industrialization, tons of factories running, and they built up over the last 20 years a new middle class. So for the last 20 years, they were all like buying the cheapest thing for the best price with the best quality. And now they have money, and suddenly they start thinking about design, thinking about color, thinking about things that we were caring about maybe in the 90s or something, beautiful objects. So you have basically a list of 19 countries right there where a beautiful object, just because it's a beautiful object, would be interesting to buy. And that is then the question, how do you get them to buy it? You need to map out how you can actually work, or how they can get in contact with your company, and what type of experiences all along the way do you need to have to make them transition to the next step all along the way.
I'm going to guess China's on that list. I've been living there for 13, and that is exactly what I see, which is really interesting.
China, Malaysia, Morocco, for example. This woodwork, Moroccans love that type of intricate woodwork. You just need to make it a little bit more pointy. But like, this is very, for example, Asian, I think, and they have the dispensable income. And China has, what, 420 million people in the middle class now? Yeah. So.
And I know we need to get to questions, but I think that this is exactly what we've all been saying, and that goes back in part to the story that somebody is telling themselves when they buy your product, right? And this is the success of iPhone versus Android, right? It's a story we tell ourselves when we buy one product over another, and when we buy the most beautiful design over the most price performance functional design, we're telling ourselves a story about how far we've come, how much money we have, and we have long used brands to tell a story to ourselves and to those around us by displaying those brands and those products. So I think that it really comes full circle back to this, the customer journey is one of a narrative, and who you're telling it to, and how this customer is telling themselves a story, and the story that your product tells of that customer, to themselves and to their environment.
Great point.
I must end on one thing. That is actually the key thing that I love most about the whole concept of the customer journey and the experience design, is that I have never seen any director's board or fund like investors or like colleagues that you cannot convince that what you think you have to do should be done once you walk them through the customer journey. This is one of the most powerful aspects of the customer journey, is once you mapped it out, and if you have the space, do it on a wall, and do all the contingency loops, optimize it, make it better. There's a plethora of information out there where you can literally find how to do this. Any stakeholder you take there and walk them through the thing, this is what happens in here, and this is how we want to do this, and here we have to optimize this, and I need a little budget to make this. Sure, of course, it makes so much sense. It is exactly what in negotiation and argument building you call like this, taking them on a journey, and if you can take a director's board, investor, and so on this journey and explain the rationale, there it is, then there's no argument against it.
I so agree because I just did it last week. With, yeah,
It's so powerful.
it is very cool.
All right, so John, do you want to kick things off with questions here?
Sure. So you guys mentioned the importance of listening to your customers. To what extent do you take that? Because obviously, you know, if you listen to them regarding the new Coke thing, it could be a catastrophe. So how do you figure out the balance for that?
Yeah, so I'll start because I did bring up the new Coke thing. I think that we need so I think it's important to actually do the psychographics and to understand who the true customers are, because you're going to get a lot of feedback on your product. And there are going to be a lot of early adopters, and then there are going to be haters, right? You know, you stand up in the world and there's going to be haters. And so what you really want to find in this is to find the core people who are providing the type of feedback that you need. The Coke thing failed because it was an experience out of context. And what we've all been talking about is buying any product, any hardware product, from a bottle of water to, you know, a boombox that I could bring to Burning Man, is, it's experiential, right? You know, it's what it says about me. It's a narrative that I'm telling myself and others about me, right? And so you want to, test within the right context and the full narrative that Frederick has been pointing out.
Yeah, and discernment is a huge one. Is really not taking everything, but actually averaging. Like, what are we creating sense making from the response that you're getting from your audience, and then actually seeing if it's feasible. And if it's a huge change that's dangerous, I would actually test that more. If it's like little things, you can test them and reiterate. I think it's also depending on the product, how you prototyping the changes. And then when you're actually in early development, actually being able to be a bit more flexible with the prototypes and actually testing it actually will save you money. Because if you actually build the whole thing and then you find out that nobody wants to use it, or you take everybody's responses and you change it completely and then everybody hates it, that's a problem. So I think actually the more you prototype and test is better.
I would just say we're probably in customer journey design between the design thinker who is just observing and the pure marketer who is just asking questions, and the ones both have very biased data sets. In the journey design, you can actually start, once you put it out there, and do the same thing I just said, what you would do with an investor or director's board with your customer. You walk them through it, and then you get their feedback on that. And there's a next step, very specifically, you make them more of a, make them a better tester, more than a better tester, make them a co-creator. I've seen in hardware, the thing that seems to work best is when you have people that are allowed to give their input to a certain extent, where they become basically your disciples. They see how they can influence this, they see how it gets better based on their feedback, and they become the first people to go out there and to promote it within their respective networks. So choosing these people, these maybe 10 people, that can co-create to a certain extent the product with you is absolutely key. If you manage to have influential people in there, if you have to have people that have good networks, that is worth a lot, because they will then go out, because they see, oh, this is the part that I've contributed to this thing. They will literally go and promote your product out there.
So I'm going to take off the customer journey hat and put on the manufacturer's hat for a second. And I will say that I've seen a lot of products where our customer, the startup, listened to their customers, and they got a lot of feedback, and then they had a lot of features. Don't do that. That does not work.
The horse by committee is still a camel, right? And so, I think that the key is to listen to everybody. And I think from a business perspective, feature creep and over engineering, over designing things is never good, right? And so one of the things that you have to decide about your product is, what is the mantra of your product? And around branding, we look at, planting a stake in the ground, and then you don't waver from that, right? So Southwest Airlines is the low-cost leader. That's where their stake in the ground is. We are the low-cost leader. And so, marketers go around and they say, how can we make this better? How can we make the experience better? And somebody can come and say, well, we could serve caviar and champagne on the planes. Well, we would have to cover those costs. We wouldn't be the low-cost leader. So you create a filter system by which you can triage all of the feedback that you're getting. But it has to be true to what you're doing and who you're doing, because to Greg's point, you can't take every feedback and build a Frankenstein.
And when you do it, on the operations side, make sure that you do it in very discrete steps. Hey, we're gonna do this after this manufacturing run, and we're gonna take 6 months, and we're really gonna get it right, and then go to the next one. We try to deal with design changes on the fly, and that is so expensive.
Here's a perfect example. What do you have an opinion on a custom design cake? How would you think of? I want your opinion on a custom design teddy bear that I'm coming out with. You love it or hate it?
There's Build-A-Bear, so how are you going to compete with them?
Nah, it's a different brand.
What is custom about it?
It's new. It's a new character, new story.
How do people? What's the emotional story? Why would the customer be emotionally connected?
I'm also pairing with a book.
So that's actually an interesting approach, because one of the things that you could possibly leverage in that is to create what we call Transmedia story world, right? And so earlier in our career, we would work with folks like in Hollywood and games companies. I did a project with Hasbro around how do you actually create a story around a character. In the case of Hasbro, it was plush toys and some of these other elements. And you look at creating a relationship that goes beyond one physical good, that so that you can build multiple touch points with a customer. And so for anything like that, because to Maya's point, you're going to compete against Build-A-Bear, right? And that's actually an experience, right? That's not about selling a bear. That's about bringing a group of kids for an 8-year-old's birthday party into an environment and having an experience there. That's how they make their money, right? And so, one of the things that you'll have to think about is, how do you compete with these other things and to create a story world around it? The second thing I want to say about this is something that, we were at a brainstorming meeting around Greg's, and a colleague of ours worked on the Mazda Miata. And this is a great story because we have to understand when we're building these stories what we're competing against for the pocketbooks and the hearts and minds and attention of our potential customers. And the folks at Mazda thought that they were competing against maybe a BMW, right, the low-end one, or a little Toyota or something. And at the end of the day, when they asked their customers, what would you buy if you didn't buy this Mazda Miata, it came up like a European vacation, a jet ski, right? And so what we really need to think about too is what we're competing against for the attention of these folks.
After plan is to compete not against Build-A-Bear, but against Mickey Mouse.
I would be careful with competing against Mickey Mouse, and actually start with why would the big story, which is why would the kid want your bear and not anybody else's bear? Like, what is their emotional tag that will get them to? These days, it's not dragging the parents to the Toys R Us because that's gone, but getting their parents to get on Amazon and buy it. And then what? If it's buying at an Amazon, and like forgot the name of those, that was like about 7 years ago, but you basically would, even more, you'd buy a toy and would have a code, and really the toy should have cost $5, but you paid $25 and the kids would collect, because then they would have a code to actually play the character in a virtual world, and then all of a sudden the parents would be paying $25 for the toy, and then probably these days would be a subscription model, a model of like, I don't know, $10, $15 a month, and all of a sudden you're starting to actually have a relationship where it's not only about the bear, it's about this whole story world and the whole emotional attachment to it.
This series.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget Skylanders was $1 billion industry for
Yeah.
Blizzard, right? You know, so there is that opportunity to do that.
What I would say in terms of thinking is a little bit outside of the journey concept. But the reality is, if you sell something, you always are successful if there's a fundamental need. Because even when people don't want that need satisfied, once the need is satisfied, that is what makes them buy again. It's the same. So we always have to do in marketing two things. We have to sell what people want, but we have to give them what they need. This is basically the iPhone that came out at the same time. They were selling a phone, or calling it a phone, but it actually was a computer. And it actually did a lot of different things, amongst which to call, but it was a thing that satisfied a need in a society where people were more and more disconnected to communicate faster and more efficiently. So if you think about the bear that is linked to a book, probably what you would say is that the kid needs to learn how to read. Learning how to read will give them a lot of pleasure, will empower them, will give them a better interaction with adults and so on. So without it knowing necessarily, the kid will get something or learn something that in itself will drive it and the parents to buy again or more, or other parents to buy the same product. What you're selling that to them is the teddy bear. That's what the kid intuitively wants. What it needs might be education in how to read.
Great. Well, a lot of great stories up here. We're going to turn it over to networking here soon. And we've got lots of snacks and drinks left over in the back. I want to thank our awesome panelists.